Before we begin, subscribe to Blackish Focus, where truth battles deceit and justice never sleeps. Every story here reminds us, evil hides in plain sight, but light always finds its way through the cracks. The rain came down steady the day they buried Amelia Lancaster, or at least, the day everyone thought they did. A billionaire, a visionary, a woman of power reduced to a quiet casket and a trembling crowd. Cameras flashed. Words were said. And somewhere in the front row, a little girl with tangled hair and tearful eyes whispered a truth no one else dared believe. Her name was Charlotte. The man gripping her hand too tightly was her father, Lucas Bennett, Amelia's husband. To the world, he was a grieving widower. To Charlotte, he was the monster who smiled too wide when people said, "You poor thing." Amelia's death had been called an accident, a fall down the marble staircase of their grand home. But Charlotte had seen her father's face that night, the cold calculation behind his mask. She remembered the sound, not just the fall, but the whisper, "It's done." Lucas was the kind of man who spoke in silken lies. In public, he was charm and generosity. In private, he was thunder behind closed doors. He had envied Amelia's success, the way people listened to her, the way she owned the empire her father built. He wanted it all, the company, the name, the control. But the one thing he couldn't control was Amelia herself. So he decided if he couldn't have her loyalty, he'd have her absence. The plan was meticulous. A staged fall. Poison disguised as medication. A narrative of grief crafted before the deed was even done. Lucas played his role so well that even the police nodded in sympathy. But not Charlotte. She knew. And though fear lived in her chest like a second heartbeat, love for her mother burned hotter. For days after the accident, Charlotte dreamed of her mother calling her name. The sound was faint but insistent, as if coming from another room. And then, on the morning of the funeral, she dreamed again. Except this time, Amelia opened her eyes. The church smelled of lilies and perfume and secrets. Charlotte sat beside her father, staring at the closed casket. The priest spoke of heaven, of loss, of peace. But Charlotte felt only the pounding of her heart, louder and louder, until it drowned out the sermon. Then she stood. Her voice came out small but clear. "She's not dead." The crowd fell silent. Someone gasped. Lucas's face went rigid. "She's not dead," Charlotte shouted again, stepping toward the casket. Lucas grabbed her wrist, whispering between his teeth, "Sit down." But she pulled away, running toward the front, her tiny shoes echoing on the marble floor. "Open it," she demanded. "If she's gone, prove it." The priest hesitated, torn between propriety and a child's conviction. And then a nurse, Amelia's nurse, stepped forward. "Open it," she said quietly. When the lid lifted, time held its breath. Inside lay Amelia, pale, still serene. And then her fingers twitched. A flutter. A heartbeat beneath her skin. A miracle, or the moment truth decided to breathe again. Chaos followed. Paramedics rushed forward. Lucas stumbled, stammering about miracles and shock. But detectives, summoned by a tip from Amelia's trusted housekeeper, were already watching. In Lucas's pocket, they found a vial. In his car, documents. Plans. Insurance transfers. The makings of a murder dressed in elegance. It turned out Amelia had never truly died. The poison Lucas gave her slowed her heartbeat, masked her pulse, long enough for him to stage her death. But fate, or perhaps something greater, had other plans. A miscalculation. A heartbeat too stubborn to quit. And Charlotte, brave enough to listen to the whisper in her dreams, had given her mother time to live again. When Amelia awoke days later in the hospital, the first thing she asked for was her daughter. The second thing she asked for was justice. Lucas Bennett was arrested before the ink on his new will could dry. His empire, built on deceit, crumbled overnight. The world saw him for what he was, a man who thought he could bury truth. But truth, like love, cannot be buried forever. Months passed. The house that once echoed with anger now filled with laughter again. Amelia walked slower now, every step a victory. Charlotte spent her mornings drawing suns on scraps of paper and taping them to the windows. "So you never forget," she'd say, "there's light." Amelia rebuilt her company with honesty, compassion, and an unshakable belief that survival itself is strength. Reporters called her the woman who came back from the dead, but she didn't care for the title. She said she never died, she simply woke up to what mattered. And every year, on the anniversary of that day, Amelia and Charlotte visited the small church where the truth was spoken. They didn't bring flowers. They brought gratitude for courage, for justice, for the lesson that even when evil thinks it's won, good only grows quieter, never weaker. One evening, years later, Amelia received a letter. The handwriting was familiar, too familiar. It was Lucas's. Inside was a single sentence. "You may have survived, but evil doesn't die, it waits." Amelia folded the letter, locked it away, and looked out the window where Charlotte was laughing in the yard. "Then let it wait," she whispered, "because we don't hide anymore." And in the distance, the wind moved through the trees, soft, calm, free. If this story moved you, if you believe truth can still triumph over deceit, then subscribe to Blackish Focus. Here, we don't just tell stories. We uncover battles between light and darkness that remind us what's worth fighting for. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice, one brave heart to say, "She's not dead." And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what would you have done if you were there that day? Would you have believed the little girl who said, "She's not dead"? Because sometimes, the smallest voice can save the world.